Today we're going to talk about planning your systematic review and what does all of that kind of entail? So our learning objectives, hopefully by the end of our time together here, one of the things that you'll be able to do is understand how a systematic review is done. So what are the principles behind it and how are they different from, for example, a scoping review or even from a narrative literature review? So how are they different from those? We're going to talk a little bit more in depth. For those of you that were here last month when we did kind of the first workshop in this session, we talked about how a feasible research question is one of the most important elements in almost any type of review that you do. And here we're going to show you why it's even more important in a systematic review. We're going to talk about what a systematic review protocol is and why it's important and why you should have one. And then we're going to talk about how to, take a framework like, for example, PICO, if it's a clinical scenario, or SPIDER, if it's more qualitative. There's so many different types of frameworks, depending again on your research question. We're also going to talk about how do you search a database? Like once you have your question and you're ready to go into a database like Pubmed or Medline, how do you search in there? All right. And then we're going to talk about, okay, great. We searched the different databases, but depending on your research question, for example, if you're doing randomized control trials, you'll probably go to supplemental searching. And for example, there are websites for clinical trial registries that you might want to search. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We'll kind of also touch up on critical appraisal tools, citation managers, and systematic review software that can just help the entire process when you're doing a systematic review. So in 2009, there was an article written by Grant and Booth, and they literally talked about many different kinds of typology of reviews, right? So different kinds of reviews. And these are just a handful that are splattered across the screen here of the different ones that they talked upon. But the ones that are most often used are the ones that are highlighted, a scoping review, a literature review. Metasynthesis is kind of like a qualitative systematic review. It's a little bit different, but today we're going to talk about a plain old systematic review. And what does that involve? So a systematic review, in the sense, what it does is that it has a very specific research question. And what it does is that the research question, once it's formulated, there are very specific inclusion and exclusion criteria or eligibility criteria that are already generated ahead of time so that when you go right into the database, you know exactly what you're looking for. It's a very explicit systematic method of being able to find the different findings that you're looking for in a way that is unbiased as possible, because that's how you can draw conclusions to be made to answer your research question. Now, just as a review, I just want to let you know that a scoping review is a little bit different, because instead of being very strict and having these inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria that are very rigid in how you approach them, a scoping review is more exploratory in nature, whereas systematic review is more explanatory in nature. So they have very similar ways on how they do their searching, but their purposes are very different. So here's some important distinctions between systematic and scoping reviews. Oftentimes a systematic review, the question is very, very focused, okay? Whereas with a scoping review, it's a little bit more broad. The search for both needs to be systematic and transparent, and the inclusion-exclusion criteria needs to be defined up front in a systematic review, whereas scoping review, as we kind of talked about last time, it can be a little bit more flexible depending on the research question and other factors. In a systematic review, you have to critically appraise the evidence. It is very, very important that you ensure that the evidence that you are examining is what quality is it done? And so there's different tools that you can use depending, again, on the type of study that you're looking at. But a scoping review, that's not the point of a scoping review. It's not to appraise the evidence. It has a more exploratory purpose to it. The synthesis will often in a systematic review, not always, but often be quantitative, where in a scoping review, it is typically qualitative. So what are some of the considerations that you need to take into account when you're doing a systematic review? The first thing what you want to do is you want to be able to manage expectations. Now, this can happen in different ways. Okay. So we're just going to kind of review some of the different ways. And Kaden, if there's anything that I missed at the end of it, please feel free just to kind of add it, because there's a lot of stuff here. The first thing that you want to do is make sure that your review team is lined up. All right. So this could mean that, if there's a principal investigator or a PI, or two PIs, right? And you're talking about, you're wanting to do the systematic review. What sort of team members do you need? So you'll always want a librarian. In fact, with CIHR, it's mandated that you have a librarian. If you're doing, for example, a systematic review with a meta-analysis, you'll want a statistician already lined up who can commit to the project. You'll often want people perhaps that are content experts who will be able to say, you're missing this, and this element. And then you'll need screeners, and graduate students or any type of student really, are great to help with that screening process, because it allows them to learn as well. And there might be other people that you'll want to include, again, depending on the nature of your research question. Okay. The second thing is budget. Now, working in academia, sometimes you can hire someone to help when we talk about budget through grants, and we'll come to that in a second. But oftentimes you'll need to staff it besides just the graduate students and the researchers and the content experts. Sometimes you'll need to actually hire a research coordinator, for example, just to kind of keep the project on track. So that's kind of one of your budget considerations. And oftentimes if people are applying for a grant, they will add this as a budget line in their grant process. You should also think about document acquisition. So I say this as someone who works in academia and does have access, at the University of Ottawa, we have an interlibrary loan system. And for those of you that are at TOH or another, TOH also has an interlibrary loan system, but sometimes people don't have access to a library for interlibrary loans. So sometimes you would have to buy the articles. And articles can be expensive. So bearing that in mind, you might want to factor that in as well. Same thing with translation. If there's an article that is in, German, and, and just kind of, if you run it through like DeepL or DeepL or Google Translate, and you see just based on the abstract, for example, that this would be very relevant to your project, one of the things you'll really need to consider is, should you have it translated, and there's a cost associated with that. Well, and the other thing is also, or another thing I should say, is software. Software comes in the style of perhaps citation management. So EndNote is something that is often used for systematic reviews. We also here at the university support Zotero, which is a free citation management tool. And it's a really great tool. And like I said, it's free. So that kind of often helps as well. There's also systematic review software. So some of them that you might have heard are Distiller or Covidence. Here at the university, we have a subscription for Covidence, and we will be talking more about citation managers and systematic reviews at our session in December. So I just wanted to let you know that more information on that is coming. That's our next workshop together. And then the last one is dissemination. So oftentimes you may need to, you want to submit it to an open access journal, but if it's open access, there could be a really high cost associated with that. So again, these are just things that you'll need to keep in mind as you're preparing a budget when you want to undertake this kind of knowledge synthesis project. One of the things you should also note is that it's a lengthy process. If it's not being done like on the corner of someone's desk, and I say that by saying that you can dedicate maybe 10 hours to it or 5 hours a week or whatever, it'll take much longer than if you have someone working on it full time. So again, reasonable timelines is that it can take up to a year, including being able to submit it for publication. Now, bear in mind that even once you submit it for publication, then there's the peer review. And so that can take a lot of time too. So you just want to have that in mind so you can manage your expectations when you're undertaking this project. This will also depend on how complex the research question is. If it has, if you have your main research question, but a lot of sub questions that you want to ask. So you need to kind of keep that in mind as you're developing your deadlines. And again, it always comes down to feasibility. And the research question is always going to play like probably the most important role in all of this, because if your research question from the start is clear and it is not too big but not too narrow you're doing your systematic review, then it'll probably make it go a lot smoother, which might make it go at least a little bit faster, especially if you don't have to double back. So we did review this acronym for the scoping review, but now we're going to apply it for a systematic review. So as a review, this is the PIECES acronym, and it was created by Foster and Jewell, two librarians who created a great book in 2017 on different steps on how to do a systematic review. So the first one is planning. So you want to ensure that no previous reviews have been done on your topic. So all of these points we are going to elaborate more on in this presentation. So I just wanted to give you, Ken and I wanted to give you a taste of what to expect in this presentation. All right, we are going to talk about more about how to assemble a review team and what exactly is a review protocol. The next step is identifying. So how do I identify those studies? How do I get the studies that I need for my systematic review? So first, what we do is once your research question has been solidified, we take that research question and then we show you how to search for it in the databases. All right, so we conduct the database searches. If we need to do supplemental searches, so that could be, for example, citation analysis or gray literature searching, which again, we will go into more depth in today. And then we talk a little bit how to document that process. The first E stands for evaluating. So this is the level where you will screen the title and abstracts as kind of your level 1 screening to remove irrelevant studies. And then of the ones that you kept, you will then screen the full text of those studies to ensure, again, that these are articles that you would like. And then at the end, what will happen is you'll then critically appraise the studies that you've decided to include to get a sense of what their rigor has been and the bias and the risk of bias. This C is for collecting and combining data. So oftentimes you will create a data extraction form depending on what, perhaps we're saying PICO here because it's more for clinical questions, but it doesn't have to be PICO. It can be essentially you're just trying to grab the data that answers your research question and your inclusion exclusion criteria. And then what you want to do is oftentimes you will want to combine that data into some sort of detailed table so that everything is included. And that will again vary depending on what your research is and what data you are trying to pull from the different studies. The next E is explaining the synthesis. So by doing that, I mean, you are describing the results, you're reporting the results, and you're showing how what statistics you may have used when combining them. So when you're presenting your statistics, you may do this as part of your meta-analysis. And then what you want to do is you want to kind of account for any differences on how things might be different from the PICO that you had created originally. And then the last one is the S. So this is essentially, you are going to sit down, you're going to write your review for publication. And then depending on who your stakeholders are, you'll probably need to disseminate that in different formats. Maybe, there's one way to write for traditional research, but there might be, if you're, for example, you're using clinical practice guidelines, you may also need to write it as a policy. So again, it kind of depends on who your audience is and what kind of information you're trying to disseminate. But that's kind of the PIECES acronym that we like to follow for the steps in our systematic reviews. So we're going to talk about the P. What does the P look like? So this is just one example of a framework. Now, when I say framework, it's just how are you kind of breaking down your research question? There are different ways to do this. This one is most likely to be used for a clinical question. All right, as you can see. So the P would be your patient or population or your problem. The I is usually the intervention. The C is the comparison, if there is a comparison. And then the O is the outcome that you're trying to measure. And so sometimes you also have a T, which is like the type of question you're trying to ask, or the S of what type of study do you want to find? Okay, what is the best designer methodology? So there are different places So remember, one of the first things that you want to do is you want to make sure that there's nothing, no type of review that's already done on the question that you're trying to answer. All right. So this is a handful of places you can check. I'm not saying that you should check all of them. Okay. Again, this is going to depend on your research question. So if your question is very clinical in nature, okay, you'll probably want to check the Campbell Library. The Campbell Library is it has been around since for a very long time. And so what's great about the Campbell Library, the Cochrane Library, I'm sorry, is that you can search different databases within it. Sorry, I'm just loading it right now. Okay, so this is the Cochrane Library that we have access to through the University of Ottawa, and you can search. So if you wanted to see something on diabetes, in children, let's say you wanted to see if there were any systematic reviews on diabetes in children that were being done. It'll sit down and it'll search. So there's a couple things here that you can look at. So the first tab are the Cochrane reviews. So you can see that there have been 69 Cochrane reviews on anything that has to do with children, diabetes in children, but they might not always be relevant. So it might be like, for example, lifestyle interventions for women, for the treatment of women with gestational diabetes. That's not exactly what I was looking for. So being a little bit more specific, if you don't want to scroll through, for example, 69 different results, would be important. But you can see that there's a list here. The other thing that you want to note is when was this review done? So here you'll see it was 2017. That's not too bad, but like 2014 is like, it's 8 years old. So you just want to bear in mind, like 2007, this probably wouldn't be as relevant right now. Or the search strategy would be out of date because it's, more than 10 years ago. So these are just all things you want to consider, because let's say this is exactly the title or the topic, that you wanted to do your review on. Well, sometimes if you see that it hasn't been done in over 10 years, what you can do is you can do an update to a systematic review as well. Okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I just wanted to mention there are times when sometimes if you see that someone has already done your topic, if it hasn't been done for a really long time, then doing it, like redoing it is okay. And it's usually called an update. The other thing I wanted to mention is protocols. So we are going to talk about protocols, but protocols are essentially what is your game plan for the systematic review that you plan on doing. All right. So for example, if we go in here, this one is from February 2021. Okay, so if we click on it, you'll see that essentially it is a game plan of what they're going to do. So they talk about what their objectives are. Okay, they give a background of why they want to do the project that they're doing, how it might work, why is it important, and then they outline the type of studies that they're going to do and the type of participants, the type of interventions, other outcome measures that they want, so the different outcomes that they're trying to measure. And this is all information that will likely go into that data extraction form that we were talking about. They outline which electronic search databases, that they will search, as well as other resources. So that's that supplemental searching part that we were talking about. All right. They talk about, how are they going to select their studies, with screening. They talk about the different study characteristics. So this is where they would outline what their data extraction form would look like. As you can see, it's pretty long. They talk about what tools they use to assess the risk of bias and what kind of risk of bias they were trying to assess. In this case, they're talking about treatment effects and different, other, how they're going to deal with missing data. So it kind of gets more into the stats part of it. They're going to talk about their data synthesis and how they're going to put it together, because it looks like they're going to do a meta regression, and if they're doing any subgroup analysis. So as you can see, it's pretty detailed. Not all of your protocols have to be this detailed. This is a Cochrane protocol, so it's expected to be this detailed. But there are other protocols that we will see that do not have to be that detailed. But I just wanted to kind of give you a feel in Cochrane what it would look like. The Campbell collaboration is more on the social sciences end of it, but sometimes there is an overlap with the medicine or health sciences field, in the sense that they will have, if it's, for example, medical education or if there's anything really involving, simulation techniques, in medical education, or if there's like a mental health aspect. So Cochrane is really great if you're doing well, apparently if you update your link, which I forgot to do. So let's go to the cop. Here we go. So what you can do is the Canva collaboration. Again, you can just enter some keywords. All right. And then that way you can, if we type in medical education, for example, and then what you can do is you can find different results. Maybe if it liked me a bit more. It doesn't like what I put together, but anyways, there's different. So I just wanted to show you that this is more where you can search for more psychosocial kind of aspects. Not all protocols or reviews are published in these two. Oftentimes they're just in journal articles. And so again, depending on the discipline that your research question is in, all right, you can search maybe CINAHL, which is more of a nursing and allied health database. You can check Embase or Medline. Medline is essentially like Pubmed. PsycInfo is more geared towards mental health and psychology and psychiatry. And again, there's also multidisciplinary databases. So this might be a good time where if you're trying to figure out where you should look for reviews, reaching out to a librarian, because we can definitely help you depending on what your research question is. So you don't feel like you're fumbling around with all of these when it might not be necessary. So we kind of touched a bit on this, but what is a protocol and why do we want to use it? So it essentially sets out, it's like your game plan, right? So you have your rationale. Why do you want to do this review? Why is it important to medicine now? Why should people even care about it? Then you type out your objectives. Your methods are key here. Because it really makes you think of all aspects of how you're planning your systematic review. So where are you going to find the databases? Where are you going to find your supplementary information like gray literature? All right. What tools are you going to use to critically appraise the studies? Because there are different tools depending on the study design that you're using for example, for RCTs versus cohort studies, right? What kind of data do you want to collect from the included studies to form your data extraction sheet? So this is all this advanced planning that you do ahead of time so that as you're going through and actually doing the different steps that we outlined in the PIECES acronym, you're already kind of well set up and you won't anticipate any really, really big surprises. So people often ask me, why do I even want to create it? It just seems like an extra step. It is, but it's important for a lot of reasons. It helps you keep track on what you need to do. And like, you won't sit down and question, did I say, for example, am I going to use this database? Or am I going to use this? It helps you clarify your own question and explain your methods. If your research question is vague and you yourself cannot properly articulate it, it's going to be super challenging to do the project. So doing the protocol really helps kind of clarify any questions that you may have with your research question. One of the things that I really like is that it helps to reflect on any of your underlying assumptions or your biases that you might have towards the project. Makes you really think about those. And it also helps to justify and defend your decisions, especially if someone says, well, that's not right. You can say, well, based in this situation, this is how we're going to approach it as a different way. And it also kind of helps your colleagues or anybody else provide constructive criticism so that it can bring it that one step farther so that it can enhance the literature to help everyone else. So we already touched on this, but what should a protocol include? As we saw in the Cochrane one, there was a lot of information there. It doesn't all have to look like that. Essentially, you want to have a conception, like, what is the background information? Why are you studying what you're studying? All right. And so you're setting the scene of the story. Okay. That's because that's really what a systematic review is. Any type of review, it's setting the scene of a research story. All right. Here's the question that you want to answer. Here are some of the objectives. Here is a search strategy that you've done. Here's how you're going to study the selection. You're going to select the study criteria. Here's how you're going to assess it. Here's what my data analysis is going to look like. And here's what the draft of the project timeline might be. Okay, so there is a reporting standard. So what that means is there is the preferred reporting items for systematic review and meta-analysis for protocols. So this is a checklist that essentially has that will, it doesn't help you write, your protocol, because that's not what it's there for. What it's there, it's to help to guide you to write it. It's help you to ensure that all of the different categories that we just talked about, that you should include your research objectives, etc. It helps you make sure that they're there. All right. So by clicking on Prisma P, you will see that you can download the checklist right here in PDF or in Word. And there also is a document that talks about why it was created and how the decision making that went into making the Prisma P was also completed. All right. So this is a really good tool to use, because if we click on the PDF, you can see here, so they've broken it down. For example, the first one is administrative information. So here they're identifying, is it an update of a systematic review? Did you register it with Prospero, which is a registry of systematic reviews? This is also, you provide all of your information of the authors, who contributed what, if there's any amendments, and like, were there any grants, any sponsors? And then it breaks it down. What is your rationale, objectives? What is your inclusion and exclusion criteria? What information sources or databases, et cetera, did you use? Have a draft of the search strategy. So as you can see, it really does break down all the different elements that you should really consider in your protocol. Okay, so that is an example, and there are different examples that you can pull from our systematic review research guide, which we will give to you at the end. We have a link to it to help you. It has examples on how to write specifically different types of protocols. But what I wanted to show you is, for systematic reviews, you have Prospero. Now, Prospero, as I mentioned, is a registry of systematic reviews. So what does that mean? It means that only systematic reviews can be uploaded here, okay? And so a lot of them can be COVID studies, but what you can also do is you can search Prospero. This is another place where you can double check to see if there is a review already on your topic, but that it's being planned. It just hasn't been published yet. So if you are doing, for example, the pelvic floor, okay, you can hit go. And then what you'll see is that you will see that in this case, there's only one, but maybe you're looking at pelvic girdle pain. All right. So you can kind of see what the status of it is. And people will use this as an outline to create their protocol. And that's very much okay, because you'll see here that it's a little bit more straightforward. Here's the research question where you're going to do the searches, type of studies. So it's not as overwhelming as a Cochrane protocol, which has much more information, but it still does outline all of the different important elements that you will find is in the Prisma P. Okay. So I did want to give you guys different examples of where you can find protocols and where you can go to check if a review has already been done or is in the process of being completed by checking protocols as well. Are there any questions so far? Okay. So that's your planning. So there's a lot of planning that goes into it. But again, it helps make your life a lot easier as you go through the other steps. So identifying is where we want to look at the different, the databases. So what does that look like?
So yes, a lot of steps in planning. And next step is to start doing the searches. But I put this here so that I wanted to show you that we have developed a while ago at the library what we call a search strategy worksheet. But it's basically to help you identify your main concepts from your research question, and then start brainstorming what concept do you need. Do you need synonyms, or is there different variations, even in wording? So this is a great tool, I would say, to help you perform these kind of searching. Okay. But basically, what are the steps in searching for content? So there's many steps. Lindsay already talked about it, but the first step is to see, is there any other systematic review, I would say recent, on your topic? And if there is, then you have to, yourself and your team might need to ask yourself if you want to continue or maybe change the topic, or at least slightly. Anyways, so searching for systematic review, again, as Lindsay said, on your topic is the first step. Also, when you start browsing on the topic, you often have probably found a few studies that are, this is what I need for my review. We call them target article. So it's good that you have a few already identified. And then you select the most appropriate databases. And as well as Lindsay mentioned, you can certainly ask librarians for their help, because there's many databases and it all depends on your topic. Usually the main 3 help database, well, there's not more than 3, but Medline, Embase, and Central, which is a subset of Cochrane only for registry of control trials, and also CINAHL. CINAHL is often used as a complement to Medline and Embase. CINAHL is more for nursing. Sorry, I'm just, it's not on my screen here, I'm just saying it out loud. But often we might go even further than these databases that I just mentioned, and it also might depend on the topic, as well as Lindsay mentioned. If it's a bit more multidisciplinary, we might need to search in many databases so that we are capturing everything from different fields of study, basically. And there's a few steps in creating a search. So it's a bit of back and forth. Sorry, I'm just looking at the notes here. And so the main thing for me here is to talk about subject heading versus keyword searching. The database that I just mentioned all have subject headings. What are subjects? Subject describe what the article is about. It's like a tag or hashtag, if you wish. So they are assigned by the database, basically. It's done after the fact. It's not something provided by the authors. It's a control vocabulary or thesaurus, and it's more precise for pulling the good articles on your topic. In Pubmed Medline, it's called MESH term. MESH stands for medical subject heading, but this term MESH is unique to Medline. In Embase, it's called M3. So basically, every database have their own subject. So every time you search a new database, you will have to search for what is the appropriate subject for your on your topic, on your concepts. Okay, compared to free text searching, keyword searching, basically we're searching with the words of the authors, the language of the authors, whether in the title, the abstract. And because of that, there's might be a lot of variety in terms of spelling, as they say here, or synonyms, ways of saying something, right? So for example, I often use the same example for cancer. So there's different ways sometimes to say the same thing: cancer, neoplasm, tumor, carcinoma. I guess it depends on the type of cancer for sure. But so you need to think of all of those potential synonyms when you do keyword searching. Although we love subject heading librarian and we use them all the time, but there's still a limitation using subject heading, such as sometimes you are working with a topic and specialized, and there's not a subject exactly on that. So you will probably do keyword searching only for that. And the other thing is, for example, in Medline, it takes a bit of time to add those subjects to the article. So the first, let's say 6 months, or I don't know, I shouldn't say a period of time, it depends. But these articles are in Medline, but they don't have subject heading attributed to them yet. So for that reason, it's recommended, which is my no, it's not this slide, it's the other one, sorry, but it's recommended that we search both subject heading and keyword. I'll come back to that. So basically, exploring the thesaurus, those subject, is the first step. But then there's a lot of tips and tricks on how to best do a search. And I will do a demo in Medline in a few minutes, and using the search operators such as Boolean operator, truncation, using adjacent adjacency such as proximity operators. I will go over all of that in more detail in the database. So what I was saying is that for systematic review, it's been proven that you need to use subject and also keyword to be comprehensive. If you don't use both, you'll be missing articles. So of course, sometimes doing searches, it could be a bit endless. So you need to find a balance between sensitivity and specificity, but also it needs to be manageable for you, for your research team. But at the same time, and this is always the tricky part, finding that balance, because at the same time, a systematic review, by definition, you need to find everything written on this topic. So this is often why people have to review and screen thousands of title and abstract. Okay, so there's another step. So since 2016, this article has been published by McGowan and many people. Peer reviewing the search strategy is now a common step in searches for systematic reviews. So it's another thing you should have a look at. So basically, if a librarian's working with you, then a second librarian will review the search for this research team and provide comments. And it's as anything else, it's to make things even better. Okay, so for my demonstration in Medline, I will use this example. What is the impact of body composition in persons with multiple sclerosis on impairment and disability? This project didn't have a PICO specifically beforehand, but I created one. It's not perfect. The population is people with multiple sclerosis. The I, body composition, but it's not really an intervention. It's more, I guess, the context of the person. And then there's no comparison. And the O is the impact on impairment. Oh, and I forgot to mention, when we do searches for systematic review, I would say almost never we will search the O, meaning we will not add the outcome as part of the search. Outcomes are too variable. There's too many things we cannot anticipate everything. So usually we work mostly with the first ones for the search. Here is a list of the keyword that I started putting together for this project. So body composition, multiple sclerosis, and I don't really have a third concept here. And multiple sclerosis, I don't really have a lot of synonym. I could say MS potentially. And body composition, this is also something you need to discuss with your research team. What do we mean? And here, the research team I was working with, they really meant a lot of different things. So it's body mass index, bone density, muscle mass, adipose tissue, and also they wanted to include obesity. But this is a conversation. Well, it's a decision they made. They could have said, no, it's not. We're not focusing on obesity. We're for a different reason, but they wanted the whole, anything regarding body composition. So that's their decision. So every time you add a concept, it needs to be a bit thought of, right? You need to think about it. So what do you want? What do you need? Okay. So at this point, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to stop this share and for the presentation. Library website, sorry, I usually come back to the very beginning. You probably all have or know that the website for the library, but all the database I mentioned, you need to access them from the library website. So on the library website, there's different way to get there, but under the menu Find, you go to Database A to Z. And if you were saying, I want to go in CNOL, then that's how you can access any database by typing their name. And also Medline is here. But before I click on it, I just want to explain something. It could be a bit confusing. We say Pubmed Medline here under frequently used, and we also say Medline on audit. What do we mean? And I'm not going to talk too long about this, but if there's any issues later, we can come back to it or we can do follow-ups. Pubmed and Medline, it's basically the same content, but on two different interfaces. Pubmed is the free interface for Medline, but it has more than Medline. Anyways, there is a lot. But then the whole thing available in Pubmed is also available in the interface of it. So I will click on Medline on Ovid. And yes, of course, it's asking me for my login information. And why do I go there instead of Pubmed? Certainly I would say it's a personal preference, but I like using it to do demonstration because it helps me explain things to you guys. But of course, this interface is a bit more challenging or a bit harder to navigate and to use. There's a bit of a learning curve compared to Pubmed, where it's a lot more intuitive to do searches. But of course, there's many people doing advanced searching on Pubmed as well. So I just want to mention that. It's all good. There's a few other reasons, but the other reason why I prefer the Ovid interface, because the other databases that I mentioned either are as well on Ovid or have these kind of platform with all the same principle of what I will be showing you today, or at least it looks quite similar. So let's get started. So whenever you type something here, it needs to be one concept at a time. You cannot do a search like Google, like a phrase, a sentence. It's not going to work, and it's not recommended for sure for systematic reviews. So let's say I start with body composition. I just want to point out that this is always selected by default. It says map term to subject heading. So I click search basically at this point, and it will bring me to that those subjects I was mentioning before. So it's giving me different suggestions. Here, there's only one, and it's pretty straightforward. But sometimes you might have different suggestions. Okay, so I'm going to click on the term body composition, and then you scroll down until you see the blue highlight. So what is this? What am I looking at? So body composition is under biochemical phenomena, okay? And it's a hierarchy. So what I'm trying to say is every subject heading in Medline and all these databases, they are all organized in a hierarchy. And what is interesting here is the following, is what we find under body composition. So under body composition, we saw body fat distribution, and it's a bit indented, if you see. And then there were a plus sign. Sorry, I clicked on it a bit too fast. So there's a plus sign. Okay, so I'm just going to explain one or two things quickly. What it means is that's my way of explaining it, is that body fat distribution is basically the child of body composition. It means it's in the family of body composition. It's part of, but more specific. And then when you see a plus like that, it means that there's even more narrower term under this one. And sometimes it continue. Okay, so under body fat distribution, you have adiposity. Okay, makes sense. So there's different ways to go about it, but what we recommend is if you look at the list under your term and you say, you know what, I want all of them, in theory, of course, you could select them like that. It will work. But we recommend that you instead do click on this column. Sorry, I'm going to go back up to show you. It's called explode. So explode is a function in the database that allows you to explode your term body composition to include all of its narrower term. So even if there's 10 of them, it will include all of them, and you don't need to select them all. Okay, so I'm going to continue, and I didn't mention it at the beginning, but if there's any question or if I lost you, please do interrupt me. I don't see too much. Oh yeah, because I minimized you guys, but please just tell me if you have any questions. Okay, so once I've done my selection, like here, I select my term and I explode it to include the other ones. I go back at the top and I click continue. The next screen here, it's what they call subheading. Subheading or qualifier that you can add to the search to make it more specific. It could be used, I would say anyways, sometimes it's very pertinent and it exactly works for you and your project. But I would say often I'm more on the tendency to not do subheading for systematic review, to just keep things a bit more general. Here, the list is very short, but if it's a condition, a disease, then this will be a lot longer and it's about treatment. So do you want article only about treatment or only about prevention or only about, I don't know if it's immunology, or there's many of them. So you could certainly do that. Personally, I don't often recommend it, but it all depends on your project. Okay, so I know I'm talking a lot, but I just want to explain all these steps carefully. So basically, I would basically ignore this page. So I would click continue, and it will just go on and do the next step, which is searching actually what I was looking for. So here it shows me that I have 59,000 articles that have body composition, but also these other additional terms. You see EXP. EXP means exactly the fact that I exploded body composition. It could be a bit strange because you don't see these other words, these other subjects here. We don't see adiposity, but they are included. So just so you know, they are included, even if you don't actually see them in the search, okay? Okay, so since I mentioned before, usually we always do an equivalent for my subject heading. What is it's like doubling things. I do subject for concept and also keyword searching. So for body composition, I'll write it down and then I'll explain what I do, but now I'm doing a keyword search. I have to remember what I usually do. It might not be perfect, but okay, let's say composition or mass. I'll go with that for now. Okay, I've done a lot of things here, and it could look a bit weird, of course, for anyone that don't do these things all day long, like us librarians. So let me take a second to explain. Body composition, I could have searched it as an exact expression, yes. But here I'm doing something which is using the proximity operator, ADJ in the interface of it. And it means I'm saying, please find the word body close to the word composition, but with maybe up to a maximum of 2 words in between. And it could be reversed. So for example, if in an article in the abstract, they say composition of the body, then it will be picked up. So all of those words that I'm using, or these ADG, it's all of these things that I've, thought about with the research team and say, well, okay, and you can, think about it. Is it 2? Is it 3 or more? Or do we want to do an exact expression? I personally often use the ADJ just to give a bit more. So it's basically giving me a bit more flexibility, but still try to be more consistent, or not consistent, but pertinent for on your topic. So the other thing that I did is having a few synonyms. The other thing is body mass is something that sometimes is mentioned. So I decided to use it as it's not really a synonym of composition, but it's another word. Since I'm using the word body here, I'm saying, I'll put it here, but I could have done it on many lines, like not just like this, because I am making it a bit more complicated, and I'm sorry. I'm using parentheses, and I still need to explain that why it's important. So these 3 synonyms, well, not synonym, but these 3 expressions, they are searched with or. So what I'm saying is, I'm okay if I find body composition, body mass, or masses of body, I guess. And so I combine these words with or, and the whole thing I put them together and I, close them in a parenthesis and I say any of them close to the word body. If I don't put parentheses, what the database will do is that it will search body close to the word composition, and that's it. And then it will say or mass, like anything regarding mass or masses, not mass linked to body. So all these parentheses thing, it's quite important. And if it becomes too complicated for you, and I shouldn't say it this way, but if it becomes too complicated, you could certainly just do one line at a time. Let's say I do one composition and then, and I haven't finished explaining, I'm sorry. So you can do one line for one concept and that's all good, okay? Usually I would recommend to put the whole thing in one parenthesis anyway, but at this point, the database did it for me. So just bear that in mind. It might be better to do it. Why is that? Because I'm saying, again, I'm giving another command to the database. I'm saying, please find this expression in the field title, abstract. KF stands for author's keywords. Okay, so it's me again giving the command to the database, and that's usually what we use for these searches. And yeah, so the whole thing is closed in the parentheses. And the last thing I need to explain is this truncation. So what is truncation? I'll give another example. Sometimes it's easier. So instead of, let's say you want article that is Canadian content or done in Canada, research done in Canada. Maybe you search the word Canada. And I would remove the A at the end of Canada and add the asterisk and search it in, again, the whole thing, title, abstract, keyword. And because at this point, what it does is that the truncation, what it does is it finds words that start with these letters, Canada, without the A, but could end differently, of course, like Canadian, etc. So I often use it, at least for the plural version. Here I didn't do, so that's another thing. For mass, I decided not to use it, the truncation, because I don't know, I don't want words that start with M-A-S-S. I'm only thinking now of massotherapy in French, sorry, but any word, so it would be too many variations. So anytime you use truncation, think about it. Okay, am I going to retrieve words that I don't want? Is it okay? Is it not okay? Etc. Okay, so as I showed you in my list of keywords in the PowerPoint, there's a lot more words that expression, and every time it's the same principle. I search, I don't know, I'll just do one more quickly, but then I'll spend a bit less time. Bone mass. I think it's the expression, sorry, the subject in Medline. Oh no, it's bone density. So you see when I type bone mass, it linked me to the appropriate subject in Medline, which is bone density. So I click on it and then I say, okay, I can look around, see if there's anything else. But for me right now, I'm just doing bone. So I'm like, okay, there's no other subject under it. So I'm okay with that. I go back at the top, I click continue. Again, I'm ignoring the second screen. I click continue. And then I would do probably the same kind of thing. I would write bone, and again an IDJ. I decide if 2 or 3 is good, and I could say mass or density, maybe like that. And I don't know. Oh, composition. So there's me. I don't know if bone composition even exists as an expression. I'm sorry. I'm just making things up right now. So I would do it this way, or you can do one at a time. And again, the APJ is really up to you guys to decide. It just, the point of using that is to be more comprehensive. It's always the same thing with a systematic review. You always want to be comprehensive. But again, and sometimes we test things. You test these, is it okay using these synonyms or using this, or maybe not. So you test them out and see what works. Okay, so let's say I'm good with these, pretending I'm done with this whole concept of body composition, even if I'm not. Usually you would or these, and there's different ways to do it. Okay, why do I do or? So I'm just going to do it and explain. because I'm saying I want to find an article that talks about multiple sclerosis, which I haven't searched yet, and any of these expression or concept or subject. Either they talk about bone density, I'm okay, or either they talk about body composition, which is why I would combine everything with or. So you can select those lines like I just did and click or here. But again, there's different ways to do it. So the other way is to write it out and you say 1 to 5 like that. So either way, it's kind of the same thing, as you can see. Okay, and I'm just going to do multiple. Sorry, I cannot type. Oh my goodness. Multiple sclerosis. So again, yes, it brings me to multiple sclerosis. Scroll down and and I see here, okay, there's again, more narrower term. And yes, I want to include them. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, there's always so many things to say. In Medline is like a dictionary. Those subjects, it's really much like a dictionary of terms. Why I say that? Because all these subjects they all have a definition, and these definitions are found on the right-hand side, and you click on these little blue eye buttons. So let's say for chronic progressive multiple sclerosis, I just want to see what do they mean? What is their definition? So it's a form of multiple sclerosis, et cetera, et cetera. So that is their definition. That's the main reason why you want to go there. But there we go. So all of these subjects that you see in Medline, they all have definitions. So sometimes it's good to have a look just to make sure, are we talking about the same thing? All right. Okay, so then I'm done. I say explode multiple sclerosis to include the narrower term because I do want that. I go back up, I click continue. Oh, you see here, now that I have a condition, I have a longer list of subheading. And let's pretend you were doing a project about prevention of, let's say, multiple sclerosis. So yes, there is a subheading for that. So you could certainly use it. Again, I would be cautious about that for a systematic review. But just so you know, you can explore these different options here. Again, if you don't want to use any, you just click continue. Maybe I didn't say it, but whenever you use one, it narrows down your result to only article that talks about prevention of multiple sclerosis, right? So that's why, I want to be careful with that for systematic review. Okay, I click continue, and then I'm just going to do multiple sclerosis. If I can type. Okay, so I do the keyword version. I just want to get results for you guys. And then I would combine with or these two. And then what you do is you combine those two sub search set, if you wish. You combine them with and. So I select them again with the lines and I click and, the button and. Okay, so there's 400. When I did this project, of course, we had more because I had a lot more topics included here. So in a nutshell, that's how you do searches in Medline. And if you were to do searches in Embase, it would look quite similar. Central, because they are both on Ovid. If you were going to CNOL, it's another interface, but the principle is kind of always the same. So anyhow, so I think I'll just gonna stop with this at this point with the search, except if there's any questions before I leave this screen. Is there any questions?
You use a language here when you do the query, and I wonder if there is any documentation so that I can train myself on that language, search language. Secondly, you said earlier, and because of my area of research, I'm familiar with the library science a bit, and I know the subject headings are very important. And you said that you on any database, when we do the search, you could either do the search on the subject heading or do a search on free text. If I'm right, how do you control that? Do you have a control, or is just coincidentally, if you search for something that happens to be a subject heading, it brings the subject heading or not? And also, I wonder if not just on medical databases, is this functionality available in Scopus, for example, and in other area of science? Sorry, I asked too many together.
No, no. It's just the first one. I'm not 100% sure if I understand it, but okay. How to grab and find your subject, it's how I mentioned it. You type it here and you click search, because it basically by default, it brings you to the subject, to this list of subject. And then you find the appropriate one and you click any, you basically search it and you use it. A keyword version, again, is searching in the title abstract. And I should have maybe showed you something, which I will do now. Okay. Basically, when you search keywords, it's searching those words that I decided I want to use that expression, body composition, and find it is in these articles in Medline, in the title, in the abstract. So this one article was picked up because the word or the expression body composition is in the title, right? And it's also in the abstract. So this article doesn't have subject heading, and that's what we were saying. Some don't have them. When you see keyword heading, again, this is Medline. It means it's those keywords that the author have to submit to the journal. And that's also what I'm searching. I'm saying search KF. KF is this field. It's very technical, and I'm sorry about that. And let me just find another article that have, subject heading. So just to show you what it means when it's an article with subject heading. So any of them, I'm just going to click on one. Okay, so this article have this list of subject. And it was picked up because it says adiposity. It's not one, linked with multiple sclerosis. I'm just giving you an example. So this article was picked up, as I said, because the subject of the database, adiposity, was used for indexing this specific article. And it doesn't appear anyway, sorry. And the question about Scopus do not have its own subject heading. And I could go on because it's more complicated than that. It grabs the whole Medline and Embase database Scopus. So if an article has subject from Medline and it appears in Scopus, it will list those subjects. But usually we would search Scopus only with keyword because they don't have their own list of subject heading, like they didn't create the subject. So, which also, we do search Scopus or Web of Science for systematic review. I would personally say it's usually not our first database, like we are for a health topic, I would say, putting in the frame of for health related medical topics, we would go most likely in Medline first and create that, and do searches here. But then if your subject is a bit multidisciplinary, then maybe we would use, you could use, and it would be good to use Scopus. But in Scopus, it would be probably only a keyword search.
The reason why we don't recommend Scopus or Web of Science, because as Ken had mentioned, it doesn't have those mesh headings and that ability to, because one of the things about searching for systematic reviews is that it needs to be reproducible. You cannot reproduce a search in Scopus, even if you have the same terms, because it won't always pull the same articles when you search it. But in Medline and databases like Medline, Pubmed, and Base, technically what should happen is when you do the same searching and you were to put all the same search terms, date terms, and everything, you should technically get the same number of results. And, if the dates were the same, right? But I mean, that number, the 487 that Kedin has, that'll change perhaps on a daily or weekly basis. But the idea is that I can go into this Medline search and reproduce exactly what Kedin did and get the exact same search results if my dates were the exact same. That's the idea. And you
Right.
can't control that in Scopus. So that's one of the reasons why we tend to lean away from multidisciplinary databases that don't have mesh terms or controlled vocabulary or keywords, I should say.
These are a very good question. And, for people that don't do searches, all the time, it is certainly a bit up to use these interface. So we are giving you a bit of a first, taste of it and how it should be done. But what I would invite you to do is to try it out. Try it out with your own concept. Try to find subject and then maybe try to replicate with keyword, and then see how it goes. And maybe you'll find whatever you need. But actually, I think it's important that you try it out. And, when we help residents, for example, we help them quite a bit at the beginning, but we also want them to gain that knowledge of using these interfaces, these databases, because it's another thing they should learn. It's a skill. It's a research skill. For faculty member, it's up to you, I would say, because we can certainly do a bit more for you guys. Sorry, I don't know if I should say that, but our services are different for different population. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say. Now, I wanted to mention that there is a wonderful table that one of my colleagues created. Well, I guess we all kind of participated, but because you said, is it somewhere, all these tips and tricks? I don't know if I understood your question correctly, but yes, so we could send it back to Maddie. I don't think it's in our PowerPoints, although, so I would need to send the link to Maddie, but we have listed all these different ways to search in these different databases, what it means, why doing TI-ABKF, it's Medline, in Embase you might do it a bit differently. So anyways, that exists and we can certainly send it out. So this is just an example of a comprehensive search done for a systematic review that is published. So it's just to give you an example. You'll see that often for systematic review, these searches are a bit complex, but because people have spent many hours building these searches, usually, again, it's an information specialist, a librarian, but we don't want to discourage people to try it out and do some of that work themselves for sure. Okay, so now moving on from the database searches per se, because it's a systematic review and because we are saying you need to find almost or everything about a topic, then you might do additional steps on top of database searching. So the first one that we always almost do more naturally is looking at reference lists. So the articles you find that are at the end included in your review that you did the screening and whatever, which I will talk in a minute, sorry. You look at their bibliography and you screen those as well. Maybe you'll find something else that you haven't found yet. There's also forward citation searching. Okay, so reference list searching, it's basically looking in the past. And there's Scopus. We mentioned Scopus a minute ago. It's a database that allows you to look at who cited this article. So then it's looking in the future. So let's say you have one article or a few that are, your included study for your review. You would put those titles in Scopus, and you would look at who cited these studies. So it's what I call forward citation searching. Again, and you screen those and see if there's anything else that you might have missed. Because even if we do very comprehensive search in database, maybe that's what I should have mentioned from the beginning. Hopefully we are not missing anything, but we might, even if we do as much of a good job as we can. So these additional steps, even for regular literature article, it's important. And then there's also additional things you can do that is a bit more maybe gray literature. If you are looking at control trial, you might look at registry of control trial. And I'm going to talk about gray lit right now. So gray literature, what is that expression? It means that everything that it's not, published or produced no, sorry. So grid literature is what is produced by different bodies, government, academic, business, whatever, but it's not in the regular publisher or published journals or books. So often we could see that conference proceeding, conference abstracts are not regular journal articles. So this is considered grid literature. Dissertations and thesis, and that could be important depending on your topic to search those. These are sometimes do end up being also published. Some students might publish them as an article, but many don't. So they have their thesis and it's available somewhere, but it's not a regular, published thing in a journal, for example. So you need to search it separately. And any like white paper or policy, whatever it is that you're looking for that is maybe more government or agency oriented, then you need to look at those as well. And often we do that by searching on the web. Okay, sorry, that's about it for grid literature. It just, again, sometimes I do a session, an hour session on grid literature searching and it's etc. So it could be a bit endless, but just keep that in mind. Sorry, I'm just going to go back up. Just keep that in mind that it's an additional step and it's important. But what is important with grid literature, as well as with regular database searching, is to create a framework, a frame of what you want to retrieve and what you don't want to retrieve, and what will you be searching. So grid literature is even more endless compared to database searching. So because you can follow the rabbit hole, is that the expression, when searching on the web. So sometimes it's good to explore a bit and then decide, okay, I'm going to search these individual website for government or whatever it is, or I'm going to select these specific journal because I forgot to mention hand searching. Sorry, I'm going back. I'm sorry. Maybe it's because it's a bit late for me. So I'm sorry about that. So hand searching is another supplemental way of making sure you've not missed anything. And what it means hand searching is basically you select maybe a few journal and you look at all the published number of the journal. And it's also time consuming, of course. So that's why you don't do a lot of them, but it's, again, an additional step. Next thing, record keeping. It's also very important. You need to keep track of everything you do, all the steps you take. When it's for the search, for example, you record the search itself. When did you search? How many results did you get? And then all the different steps in the process of doing a systematic review, you should record everything. Who did what, when, because again, we said it takes a while to do this project. So you might need to come back and say, oh, who created the protocol or did this or that. So managing references, I know Lindsay talked about it quickly at the beginning, and we will have another session on that. So usually we recommend that whatever you do, when you do your database searching, you send the result in a citation manager. And those usually could be the main ones are EndNote, Zotero, Mendeley. Zotero and Mendeley are free citation manager. EndNote has a web free version, but it's not very good. Sorry, editorial here. But the desktop version is very powerful, but it's very expensive as well. To be honest, again, I'm very honest, but I love Zotero and I use it all the time. And it's a very good tool to do citation, managing your references and citing and what's not. And that's also why we're going to give you a session on it in a few weeks. Also, you need to kind of keep record of what you're doing, as I said. Once you have done the search from all the database, you need to deduplicate the results, meaning from Medline and Base, you'll have a lot of the same results. So that's what might happen. And you need to kind of have a tool that will help you remove duplicates. The citation manager will help you with that. But also another thing that we'll talk more in detail later is that Covidence, which is a citation manager tool, will also remove duplicates, and it does it automatically, and it does quite a good job. Anyhow, so there's all these steps are needed when you do these reviews. And of course, when you've done, let's say, the first screening, you need to do the full text screening next, and you need to find these studies. So you need to, gather those PDFs. Lindsay mentioned Interlibrary. So we have a lot in our collection. We have a lot of articles in the library collection here at the University of Ottawa. But anything we don't have, we have this service where you can ask for something that we don't have in our collection, and we'll get it for you for free. Hopefully we'll find it and get it for you. Okay. Next, evaluating. So we talked about it a bit, but let's go a bit more in detail. So process for study selection. Well, we already talked about the duplication, but the main thing about this step is the screening. And again, we'll look at it more when we go into the next session with Covidence. Tools like Covidence really help with that. There's other ones out there. In fact, there's one called Rayon, Dissemination. These are other software that help you for that step, screening. And again, we'll go in more detail. But that is a step that takes quite a bit of time. You screen these abstracts first, and usually it's done by 2 people independently, for sure, to remove bias as much as possible. And then after that first step is done, you will have a list, hopefully a lot less huge, of article to read and to screen. So you say, full text screening is basically you read the article and you decide, is it yes or no, we want to include this paper in our review. Okay, so Prisma, we also talked about it a while ago with the protocol. And Prisma at first was invented or created, the first one was published in 2009. And after that, these other ones like the protocol one appeared afterwards. And just this year, Prisma, which it's called the preferred reporting item for systematic review and meta-analysis, has been revised, and it was published this year, 2021. So they call it Prisma 2020. So I invite you to have a look at it. And again, it's just to help you have more of a frame. It's a reporting structure. In fact, so there's the checklist, but there's also the flow diagram. And if any of you have already seen that in papers, like the diagram, just so you know, in the 2020 version, there's a bit more. So they want a bit more detail. Not a lot more, but a few more things. So I would invite you for you to have a look at it. I think it's quite important. Okay, and after you've done the screening, you have a list of included study. The next step is critical appraisal. And it will depend on what type of study it is. There's different critical appraisal that can be done. And this is a very important step in systematic review, because you also are reporting, maybe you're going to provide recommendation at the end. So you need to know, is it based on studies that are strong, with strong methodology, or have bias in them, et cetera, et cetera. So this step is quite important. So yeah, and in the details, usually you might test it out first, but then afterwards, when you found the right tool for you, again, it's done by 2 people independently that will critically appraise every study that are included in your review. And here, there's so many out there. It's great. So if you are doing something more for control trial, there's the consort group that have their own, that you can use, the critical appraisal tool. And maybe cohort study is more what you were looking at, and the CASP group has their own as well, critical appraisal. So as I say, it depends on the methodology of those paper. And it might happen that you have different type of methodology in your included paper and included articles. So at this point, it's okay. You might have to use different critical appraisal tools for different articles in your review. It's okay. Okay, so next, collecting and combining data using data extraction. That is also another importance. Well, everything is important. I shouldn't say that in a review. So data extraction. Let's say you have at the end 20 study that you are using for your review. These are what I call the included studies. So then you decide, usually it's done mainly at the protocol stage, as Lindsay mentioned. So you would create a bit of a list of study characteristics that you want to grab from the study. So there's the basic ones, detail on participant intervention, if there's comparator, outcomes, study design. But then it also depends on what is your project about. So it might be quite different from one project to another, these data extraction form. So yeah, usually it's a table and you extract the data from all these studies in that table. And also it helps at the end for writing up the review. And there's many templates that exist. And Covidence, again, has a data extraction form that can be used. You don't have to use it, but it's there. And we'll have a quick look at it next time, the next session. And towards the end, so there's now explaining the synthesis. So it's basically writing up the review. Again, the synthesis, how you will present the information, again, has to be thought of from the get-go. Things could change, but usually it's at the protocol stage that you will have decided how you will report on your project, how you will synthesize the result, et cetera, et cetera. So it's decision that you have to make. And I'm linking here to the library, the University of Ottawa Library guide, systematic review guide, because we have a few suggestions on how to do this step. And there's additional, I'll show that in a minute, but additional resources that could help you with that step. And then summarizing. So, so you write for the publication, and you're summarizing the review and the conclusion. I just took a quote from the Cochrane Handbook for Evidence Synthesis. It says, review authors should not make recommendations about healthcare decisions, but they can, after describing the certainty of evidence and the balance of benefits and harms, highlight different actions that might be consistent with particular patterns of values and preferences and other factors that determine a decision, such as cost. Anyhow, so it's just to say that, as anything else, you have to be a bit careful on your conclusion. I'm going to link back to all these other resources. We haven't talked too much on the last few steps. Well, we talked about it, but we kind of did an overview. And so there's so much out there, depending on what type of review you are doing. The Cochrane Handbook is great. It is written for Cochrane, so they have a certain type of review they're doing, but the Cochrane is basically the gold standard of systematic review. So I would invite you to look at their book. It's online, it's free. The Joanna Briggs Institute also have an online book for reviews. So they have different type of reviews in there. So that could also be interesting for you. It's all to help you with the methodology, right? And Cochrane also have more interactive learning videos and it's like a course. And the University of Ottawa has a subscription to it. So I'm linking to it here. If for you or students or anyone wants to really tackle and be expert on how to do reviews, then I would invite you to certainly do this course if you wish.
So we have thrown so much information at you. So this is a good thing that this has been recorded, but it should give you an idea that this is obviously not a light undertaking. And especially people who have never done this type of review before often think that it'll be more straightforward than, say, doing empirical research or data collection, and it's not. It's just a different type of intensity. So one of the things that you need to think about, again, is coming back to that managing expectations. You need to be realistic, right? Do you have the time? Do you have the resources? Do you have the research team in place? Where can you get help? And is your research question clear and feasible? That's really your first the first things that you want to have in place as you are planning this. Okay. And when you're searching, obviously you want to be exhaustive, because that is the whole point of a systematic review, is to be as exhaustive as possible to get all the evidence, but you need to know when to stop. And this often applies. I mean, databases, usually you have a place to stop, but gray literature can go ongoing. So as Kitten mentioned, having a game plan kind of for your searching of your databases, but also having a game plan for what resources you're going to search in gray literature is going to be important as well to develop. And I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, in the chat, there was some discussion about librarians being best friends and having a good conversation. Not going to lie, we're superheroes. So you should just come see us at different steps, because that's what we're here for. We're just going to sit down and help you. So that's really what we're here for. Next slide, get in. Oh yeah. So we'll help you with, talking about databases and making sure your supplemental methods are well. And the other thing too is you want to make sure that you, right when you're writing your protocol, that you will make sure that you're using the appropriate critical appraisal tool. Again, all of these things are just really important at the beginning planning stages to make your project go easier. So if you have questions or anything, at our next slide, we have our contact information. Kaden and I are only two of the librarians in this fabulous team at the Health Sciences Library that we have to help you. So if it's not one of us, we will always be able to find you another librarian that can help us, help you, with any of your research questions on this topic. So thank you so much for attending. And so now if there are any questions in our very, very fast presentation. Usually we do this type of session in like a 2-day span, not in 2 hours. So questions, we're here for you. Doug.
A good question. Yeah, thank you very much, Corinne and Lindsay. That was a great overview. And it did go very quickly, so I'm glad that we do have it recorded. I had a laugh earlier on, or smile, I should say. Lindsay, when you said we're just doing straight of the mill systematic reviews in this session, because, as you pointed out, rightfully so, a protocol and a search strategy, it's complex, and it is a tremendous amount of work. And when you said that, I had to think about something that I'm coming across lately for topics that have been reviewed a lot, where there have been a lot of reviews when you're talking about updates. Mm-hmm. And some areas have been, there's a lot of systematic reviews. So I'm starting to see reviews of reviews. Is there really such a thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a review of a review is not an update. Those are two different things. Mm-hmm. And so an update is where there is a systematic review that either is older in nature, as the one that I showed you in Cochrane, or perhaps as you're looking at the methods, you notice that the methods are poorly done. So in a systematic review, as Kaden mentioned, you need to search more than one database. So if they only have one database and they say, oh, I searched Scopus and Google Scholar, I mean, that is also a justification to update a search strategy, or honestly, probably just do it from scratch, to be honest with you. So that's one thing. But yes, there is so when on a topic, there is so much information. So actually right now, I'm working on a grant proposal on vitamin B12 and folate, and what it has on genetic markers and biomarkers. As you can imagine, there's a lot of information on this topic. So instead of looking at empirical studies that are like, data driven, because there's been so many systematic reviews, what we're doing is we're taking all the systematic reviews on this topic and we're going to review that. Okay, so that is a systematic review of a systematic review, or an overview of a systematic review, or an umbrella systematic review, because who doesn't like more than one term? So it always involves, all of these different things. So then what they do is they do the same process. You search the data the same way. What's going to be different is going to be that analysis portion. Okay. And oftentimes there is a reason, a very specific reason on why you're saying that you're doing an overview of systematic reviews, right? It could be that things have changed over the last X amount of years. And so you want to look at trends, there's different reasons for it. But yes, that is definitely a possibility. And I saw in the chat that there is a living systematic review. Yes, that is also a thing. So a living systematic review, and Kedin, obviously you can pop on in whenever you like. A living systematic review happens, for example, I'm doing a living systematic review on COVID, and we're looking at using the different type of masks. So cloth masks, N95, surgical masks, and what we do is we're looking at how many times can we clean it and using what substance, so disinfectant versus UV light versus X amount of whatever. And so what we do is, because there's so much information coming out so fast right now, like on a COVID topic, we update the search every 3 months. We look at it and we go and we add studies and we see if those studies really change any of the findings that we've already seen, right? So that's why it's called that's just an example of a living systematic review, because you keep updating it on a specific schedule for a specific reason. That's just one example. Does that answer your question, Doug and Professor
Yes.
Adia?
Yes.
Yeah?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
I'm getting really interested in the methodology of because of my NLP research, and are any of you interested in doing research on the methodology of survey? Let me know. Doug, would be interesting, right?
Oh, sure.
Just to do NLP on survey paper methodologies. I think there are some activities along that line.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Very interesting.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments or discussion points? Because we do have, we go till 7. We don't have to, but are there any other points that you'd like to talk about? Into the silence of the abyss. That's okay.
Thank you
Maddie.
so much. Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. I just wanted to say a comment. I think it aligns with Professor Ria's original comment about, the specific language of searching. So if you could share, I think the library has this resource, of the Booleans, the proximity, like what is the code that you can use in Medline, for example, to say one word like the adjacent to, that's the proximity function that you should put in, the asterisks and stuff like that. I think that would be helpful for folks to know like these tricks.
Yeah, there is a meta language there that the database interprets. That's not part of the search, but you are basically communicating with the database. Google search understand those too. Like you can have a plus sign. You say, I'm searching this plus this. Literally have a plus sign. It doesn't bring back the plus sign. It interprets your intention. So I guess there should be a document like Karen was suggesting that we can look at and learn, hone on the skill of using those meta language in the search engine.
I just plugged in the chat a link to that that table I was mentioning earlier. And it's a lot of information, but it's to tackle all of these details, what to use in Medline versus the other database. It doesn't give extremely a lot of information of why or what is a subject heading, but it's mostly for the syntax and how to search. Since now you've seen a demo, like the principle, as I explained, is often the same from one database to the other. There's other ones, worksheet like that out there, but I like this one. We've done it last year, so it's quite updated. And I personally even go back to it because sometimes I forget. I was searching a database in ProQuest, which I really don't like as a platform, and I'm like, Okay, what is it again in this line? Anyway, so it's our reference tool. So please have a look. And I know I was looking back at the chat and Lindsay said, yeah, contact your librarian. Yeah, just contact us if you have questions or you want to, work on a review or whatever it is. That's why we're here. And we would be happy to do that in the future for sure.
Yeah, and we often have a lot of these worksheets that have been created that, that we can share, and that, they are kind of sprinkled all over our different like research guides and stuff. But I mean, if you don't really know, so this is why we put them online so we can share them in sessions like this as well. So
the subject headings that you showed in the medicine would be very interesting to me to have the similar ones in machine learning. And I mean, 50 years old books on library science talks about subject heading, and that's the way they used to index the information in the library system. So I guess in any area there should be, but I'm not sure how. I don't know how to access those subject headings in any specific area.
So you'll see in the chat, so the subject headings that are available in Medline are also available in Pubmed because they're the same database, like Kedin said before. So what I did is at the very beginning, you'll see that I put in, it's the Pubmed mesh database. So what you can do is by clicking on this link, it's the very, very first one. By clicking on this link, what you can do is go in and then type in the different words. There's never going to be like here's like literally all the machine automation headings. Like you have to build the search. That's how it goes a little bit. So you can look in there and search to see if there is a mesh. If there's not, there could be something similar. Another way to find out for mesh around your area, kind of like what Kedin showed you in Medline, is find articles that talk about it, and you can see which mesh headings that were used, and you can also kind of incorporate that into your search. That's often how like librarians will, if we're trying to build a search on a topic we're not too familiar with, like machine learning, what
Right.
we'll do is we'll go to target articles like Kedin mentioned, and we'll use those, and we'll go into the database to find how they've been indexed, and we'll use those words to build our search around that idea. You guys are okay, we're going to end it here. But if you have follow-up questions, you can reach us in many, many different ways.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.